on Jesus, all things are possible. I can mount on wings like eagles and soar. When I call on Jesus, mountains are gonna fall. 'Cause he'll move heaven and earth to come rescue me when I call.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is another It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanya, and I have a very special guest with me. I am excited to speak with her and to hear her story and to receive her nuggets of wisdom. I met her recently and I was quite impressed with her presentation, and I thought, here's somebody I really want to get to know better. And it has finally happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to allow my guest to introduce herself to you. But for now, I just want to remind you, the Bible says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for prosperity and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, "With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Once again, welcome, welcome, welcome. Please introduce your lovely self to our guests. Please let us know your name, where you were born, and where you come in your family.
Yeah. So hello everyone, and thanks to Sanyo for having me on the podcast. It's an honor. My name is Lianne, and I am 33 years old, just recently turned 33. And yeah, I've been working as a counselor and psychotherapist more recently in the last few years, and have a background working with children and young people and adolescents within schools, community-based settings, and also young offenders as well. So quite a vast background, and very passionate about young people, their mental health, and even adults, and just providing safe spaces to be able to talk freely without judgment, and just for, people to get that support that they need, because I think in our community, it's something that is lacking.
It's lacking. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you very much for that. No, I'm going to go a little bit into the background. Where were you born?
So I was born in London, in Edgware. So kind of Harrow/Barnet, kind of comes under Barnet now, but yeah, I was born in Edgware Hospital.
Are you an only child, or are you the middle child, the baby?
So I'm actually the oldest child. I have a younger sister as well. She's 21, well, turning 21 this year. So yeah, she's much taller than me, but she's younger than me.
She's a baby. All right. And what was school like for you growing up in Edgware, in Barnet, in that area?
So even though I was born in Edgware, I actually grew up around Wembley and then moved to Harrow. But I'm still close to Wembley. So it's kind of depends who I'm speaking to. Some people don't know Harrow, and then some people identify with Wembley more because of the stadium and everything. So, but I went to school in Wembley, and it was a very diverse school, Preston Manor. And yeah, it was actually a very good experience for the most part. A very diverse bunch of friends, very culturally, I think very culturally competent school. They would do a lot of things to, whether it's kind of extracurricular activities and performances and things for us to get involved in. Each year they would have annual performances like theatre productions and things like that, which was really fun. Definitely in my element. And yeah, just had a lot of friends from all walks of life, really, which was really nice. And I think I wouldn't want to change that. I often dream of moving out of London, but then I wouldn't want to lose that kind of cultural dynamic that we have. Yeah.
And would you say you are from a close-knit family?
Yes, very, very close-knit family. And actually, most of my immediate family, we all live between 10 and 30 minutes of each other, which is really beautiful, mostly on my mum's side anyway. Yeah. So we can just turn up at each other's houses at any time.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't have to book an appointment. We can just say, "Oh, I'm in the area," or "I've got this for you. I'm going to bring this for you." And no family is perfect, but I just
Yes.
love that whatever happens, whether good or bad, we always show up for each other, and I just love
Yes.
that about us. So yeah, really close with my
Awesome.
cousins as well.
Lovely. That's one of the things I found strange when I just arrived in the UK was the fact that I couldn't just drop in on anyone. I had to
Yeah.
call ahead and say to them, I would like to visit you. And that just felt so strange and um false, artificial
Mm.
is a word. Is that because I'm used to just dropping by somebody's house and hello, I'm here, and you sit down, and if you're having breakfast or dinner or lunch or whatever
Yeah.
it is, you're joining in, or you're dropping by and you're saying, hey, let's go somewhere, but I've learned to adapt.
Yeah.
I've learned to
Yeah.
adapt. What sparked your interest in counseling?
Oh, so a number of things actually. And I do say now that I think it's what God called me to do all along, but maybe I didn't necessarily know it yet at the
Mhm.
time or earlier on. I've always been that person that people tend to gravitate towards for like peace and calm and to mediate, to resolve issues or conflict. And even my friends, I would always be sort of the advocate for my more sort of shy friends. And
Mhm.
even in primary
Mhm.
school, I can remember, and I had a few friends growing up who lost parents quite early on, things like
Mhm.
that. And yeah, I just naturally wanted to be there for them. I didn't necessarily know how, but
Yeah.
just show up for them and just check in on them, make sure they're okay. And I think towards, more later on into my career. After working in schools, doing pastoral support roles, but also some academic support as well, I
Mhm.
found that there was a lot of focus on academia as opposed to making sure that emotional and mental well-being was actually a priority. And I
Mhm.
found that through mentoring, counseling, therapy, all of that pastoral care that is what was lacking, that they just needed a space to really feel seen, heard, and understood. And
Yeah.
so I remember one of my students, I think, yeah, about 10 years ago now, um, he had a counselor, but I was kind of the first point of call. I was working in a sixth
Mhm.
form at the time. And he said, "Oh, why don't you just be my therapist? I have one, but I find that I can talk to you much better." So I thought, interesting. And a lot of them would just come to me with all their problems and, "Miss, this happened today. And can you believe?" And I'm really struggling, or whatever crisis they were in, I would have to sort of support them and then also sometimes liaise with parents. And so I started off doing, it was a 2-day course for sixth form support officers, counseling course. And then I think that's when I realized, okay, this is something that I want to pursue more.
Pursue.
Yeah, I also had an auntie. My auntie, she's also a counselor. She trained many years ago. And I had a friend as well who was in the midst of her training. And yeah, they encouraged me as well to pursue that. And so yeah, I began the journey.
What I'm hearing from what you've said to me is that you are a nurturer, you're an empath, and
Yeah.
the representation that you had also helped your journey as a
Mm,
counselor and psychotherapist.
mm,
Um, Do you think that it is something that is natural to the African diaspora, to the Black community, to
mm.
have counselors and therapists um, up in their business?
Wow. I think that's a podcast in itself. And I think that's another reason why I was really determined to become a counselor and psychotherapist, because I think it's very taboo in our communities, and not just the Black African Caribbean community, but also um, Christian community as well. You know, I think traditionally we're told, just pray it away. or maybe, which is even more, unhelpful. You might be told it's something to do with your relationship with God, and maybe, or something super spiritual, which, everything has its place, I believe, in Jesus and therapy. Both can, coexist. But I think, in our communities, we really, and it's understandable, I think we just have a history of a lack of trust because of systems that have been built not necessarily to support us or to build us up, but actually to turn, to break us down, to tear us down. They're not really typically built to help us progress. And there's so many barriers to access and support within our communities. I think there's been a history of misdiagnosis as well when it comes to mental illness. And so all of these things combined, I think, make it more of a hindrance when it comes to accessing that mental health support. Sometimes not being believed or taken seriously, having to really advocate and prove to professionals sometimes that no, something is not right. I don't feel good within myself, and whether it's even physical or mental. So I think all of those things are. I think there's more chatter now, there's more conversations around mental health in our communities. There are things like Baton, which is a very good organization you can be a member of if you're a counselor, psychologist, psychotherapist, and it's for Black, African, and Asian therapy network, basically. And it just provides a lot of training and a lot of spaces for counselors and psychotherapists to actually network together, but also train and develop, professionally as well. And that had to be created because nothing like that existed. And I think the history of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis and any kind of psychology is predominantly, quite, white. We're not really represented. We're not really in research and things over time. We haven't really been part of that. And so we, I guess, have to create our own spaces sometimes,
Exactly. Yes, lovely. And so I want to talk to you about two things that you've mentioned. You've mentioned the link between counseling and therapy and religion, and the lack of representation in terms of your having had to create a network. But first, talk to me about how you have created that link between Christianity or religion and psychotherapy, counseling and therapy of that sort. And then we have a quick look at how the representation, the networking is happening.
So when you say link, do you mean in practice or how?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's up to you.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess in practice, I've had clients from all walks of life, and not all of them have been Christian per se, but those who are Christian and are openly Christian, I feel that it's been a lot easier to bring faith into it. And a lot of the time when you're going through a mental health crisis or any difficulty, common life problem, it could be a family breakdown or relationship breakdown, it could be a significant change or dealing with any kind of trauma. Sometimes our relationship with God is often tested. And I definitely feel like I use that therapeutic relationship to be able to explore that, because, sometimes you might want to talk about that struggle with your walk with God openly in church settings, but it's not always encouraged. We hear lots of testimonies, which is great, it's wonderful, but we don't often hear the struggles. And actually, when people are in that space of questioning God and, why has this happened? Why has this happened to me? And, if you're all powerful and, all knowing, then how could you allow this to happen when I've been faithful, when, I've done everything according to the book, And so I feel like the therapeutic relationship then becomes quite reparative, where I allow them to explore their, faith journey, explore their concerns and their struggles, but also a space to sort of encourage them as well, and show them grace and encourage them to show themselves grace and self-compassion, because we're human. We're Christian, but we're human first. And so we are definitely not exempt as Christians from having, any anxiety or fear or worry. And the Bible talks a lot about that as well. And I think it's nice to be able to link that together, scriptures like Philippians 4, verse 6 to 7, which is one of my favorites. Just different nuggets of encouragement, and also that, God wants to hear even our complaints, our concerns, and even if we don't find much to say, he can, that's what the Holy Spirit is there for, to interpret on our behalf, all the mutterings, all the groanings. And I think it's nice to be able to bring that into the room when it's possible. But otherwise, I think if they're not Christian, if they have faith, another faith, whether Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, I've even had Sikh clients who, I think, because they are monotheistic as well, so they do believe in that higher power in God, and you can have certain conversations with them, and they're happy to have those conversations. But where maybe they might be atheist or agnostic, I think me just being that safe space and a listening ear is helping the least of these, and that's what I try to kind of incorporate into everything that I do.
And it allows them to see Christianity in a different way, because maybe their experience, especially with persons who are agnostic and atheistic, they are normally seen, they've always seen Christians or believers as Bible beating them over the head, that sort of thing. So to have this safe space with you as a believer will be a testimony to them. Have you ever had an encounter where your faith has been a problem in your counseling?
I guess I can't think of a significant moment in time or a significant client, but I think overall, and even in my training, we would explore where we may have some sort of ethical dilemmas where, maybe something is brought to the room that, may conflict with my beliefs. And I always thought, how will I manage that? But I think ultimately I'm an empath, and it's supposed to be a non-judgmental space anyway. So I don't just look at the issue, but more so, or if something is in conflict with what I believe and how I choose to live, but more about how is it affecting my client and how can I support my client through this, whether it's an identity crisis, whether it's about their sexuality or anything like that. I think those things are typically very challenging, but when it comes to the therapeutic space, I think it's more about just making sure that my client is held in that safe space and feels seen, heard, and understood. That is what I try to focus on more than what my beliefs are. So I'm able to kind of bracket off my own, preconceived notions or my upbringing even, and just focus on what the client is bringing and presenting with. And it's a skill to be able to do that. It's not always easy. And I think, if ever it isn't easy, it's definitely something that if there's something I don't quite understand for lack of experience or just lack of awareness, maybe, that's something that I can typically explore with the client as well and get them to share. So tell me a bit more about this and how this is affecting you. And usually they are able to sort of open up and expand a bit more.
No, and that leads me straight into the network, because as a counselor or a therapist, how do you ensure that you're not overwhelmed? What safety net do you have to ensure that you and your own mental health is taken care of?
Yeah. So typically, as a requirement, even through training, we are as professionals meant to have our own therapist.
Therapist.
So I have my own therapist, and she's amazing. I've had her for since I started the last leg of my training, so the psychotherapeutic postgraduate diploma. So for the last 3 years or so, I've had her, and that really helps because you're able to sort of explore not just my own personal things that might be going on for me, but also what may have come up in sessions that may have triggered something in me. And outside of that, we also have clinical supervision. So that's really a great space as well. Really grateful for my supervisor. So I had the same supervisor again, luckily, that I had when I was training, and just we're able to bring any issues to that space and to get guidance and on best practice, different tools and strategies we can use with a particular issue, or yeah, again, if there's any ethical dilemmas where, working in schools, there can sometimes be, politics around boundaries and confidentiality, especially. And so, if I feel like overwhelmed in that sense, then I'm able to bring that to supervision, which is great. And generally, I think, I do have some friends that I gained along the way who are also in therapeutic practice, which helps too. And again, these platforms, like Baton, like I mentioned before, you are able to kind of join those spaces and just share different experiences and things like that. And self-care self-care is a priority. And I think that, whether it's doing some own grounding of my own, going for a walk after a long day of clients back to back, just having time in nature just to reflect and pray if I need to. Um, and yeah, and then on the more luxurious side, whenever I can, go into the spa or something like that. So that
Yes,
helps.
yeah, yeah. Tell me a little. Thanks for sharing that with me, because quite often people tend to think that the therapists are definitely all together. They don't need any support. They have it together, and that's why they're helping others. And
Yeah.
you mentioned something about self-care. Quite often, we or persons who are helping others don't
Mhm.
often take the time to care for themselves. And
Absolutely.
people don't realize you can't pour from an empty container,
Exactly. Right.
so you do have to stop. How do you maintain boundaries?
Mm, good question. I think so. There's different types of boundaries, right? I think so. Time boundaries, for example, I set the time frame in when I can see my clients or when they can contact me via email, um, and then time boundaries for how long the sessions are. Of course, there may be some extenuating circumstances, or if a safeguarding issue comes up, then it might be a little bit longer because you have to manage that safeguarding issue.
Mhm.
Um, but typically, I think as well, it's being open enough for them to feel safe to open up as well, but also sticking to the client's frame of reference. So, sometimes there can be some slight self-disclosure if they're going through grief, for example, and that's something that I can relate to, or anything that I've experienced, especially within school, talking about my uni experiences and trying to encourage them. That can kind of help without divulging too much. So it's just, I guess it's discernment as well,
Mhm.
having that discernment as to how much to share and not to overshare, but also not to be completely closed off either, because, I can't expect them to fully be open and then I'm just, you know, closed off. So, so that's another way I keep boundaries as well. And I think just making sure that they also have access to external services in an emergency. So I created a little crisis card that I give most of my clients. So in between sessions, and especially if I'm working in a school or something, then over the holidays, they have a list of services that they can access. And so they don't feel, because I never want to build a codependency, because that would be unhealthy. I want them to be able to self-actualize and realize that they can find the tools and the strength to self-regulate as and when they need to. So I give them some tools and strategies as well in our sessions, but then I also make sure they have access to those services, whether it's Samaritans, Papyrus, and any local services that they can speak to if they need to.
You have, just by listening to you, I recognize the wealth of experience that you have. How long have you been a counselor?
So I qualified in 2021. So it's been 3 years now. But again, I feel like it has been a calling, and even though it wasn't official counseling or psychotherapy in my previous roles, doing pastoral support and mentoring, I always covered things like mental health and emotional well-being in those sessions as well. Sometimes one-to-one with students or young people, and sometimes in small groups as well. And so I would always try and have that therapeutic, application to certain things, that approach to certain things, certain topics, and just becoming over the years more trauma informed as well, really important. So yeah, I think it's been a few years post qualification, but definitely in terms of supporting young people and their needs, advocating for them. I started working in schools in 2012, I think. So after I graduated in criminology and sociology. So I always wanted to work somehow within the criminal justice system. At the time, you had to be 21, and I wasn't 21 yet. So I started off in schools instead. And some of the schools were very challenging schools that I worked in, a lot of behavioral issues, things like that. And then again, I saw the need, that because it's like the iceberg theory, you see the tip of the iceberg, the behaviors, the problematic behaviors, the anger, the outbursts, but beneath the surface, there's always so much more going on. And I would actually just listen to the students, and they would like to kind of talk to me and get advice, guidance. And so, yeah, I feel like it's just been a lot longer than 3 years, to be fair.
Yeah. But and the thing is, it's not just the paper qualification that gives you the skill. It's actually being on the ground and the interaction, and you gain so much from that. One of the things that I know is becoming quite topical now is being trauma informed. How do you link trauma informed practice and life within the church?
Wow. Right. So in a nutshell, trauma-informed practice is about your approach to any kind of helping work or any kind of institution where you are supporting any person who has experienced any form of trauma. And I think trauma initially, or PTSD, for example, was initially associated with, veterans, war veterans who returned from the war and were having, showing signs of symptoms from being in war. So, that could be any kind of triggers such as loud noises, seeing people running. Lots of triggers could trigger them. But over time now, we're looking at trauma as in so many different forms. So it could be any kind of adverse childhood experience. It could be a family breakdown. It could be getting into a car accident. It could be sexual trauma or abuse, or any kind of physical violence or abuse, any kind of abuse, because there's different types of abuse, financial, psychological. And so with trauma-informed practice, it is about understanding how it affects individuals, understanding how it can impact on them mentally, emotionally, socially, and understanding that a lot of care, compassion, and exploration around the way it has impacted them is really needed. And so, but you're looking at it from a holistic point of view, ideally. So not only the psychological impact or but also how it may affect their social development as well, for example, how it affects the brain as well, and understanding that, you know, looking at their window of tolerance and understanding that, you know, people may present in two different ways in terms of their window of tolerance. So it could be hyper arousal, which is where you may see people presenting as acting out, being maybe a bit self-destructive, or lashing out at people, showing up as more visible, more noticeable, more anger, frustration. But then you also have hypoarousal, which is the other side of that window of tolerance, where people may become a bit more withdrawn. They may, be quite disengaged, a bit numb. They may also just feel a bit sort of apathetic in general towards life, towards people. And their social development might be impacted as well. How they build and maintain relationships. Maybe they shy away from them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's maybe they get into dysfunctional relationships, or they struggle to navigate friendships or relationships. So it's more so about ensuring that those people who've had or experienced any form of trauma get the true support that they need. And it's not just about, I think with our NHS, for example, there's a lot of funding around CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and solution focused therapy, which is a short term piece of work. Whereas if it's trauma informed, then we know trauma, there's no timeline on, how long someone should take to recover from any form of trauma. Trauma could even be grief, and the grief cycle is not linear. And it's just taking all the different theories into account and processes, and understanding that each client, case by case basis, they get the support that they need that is relevant to them, but trauma informed in that everything that they have experienced is taken into account, and it's addressing those things over a period of time, addressing their needs, and how it impacts their health, their well-being, even sometimes their ability to hold down a job, for example. It can affect that as well. So
thank you. You mentioned something about the window of tolerance. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah. So the window of tolerance is a theory more so about someone's ability to deal with, or how the trauma impacts them. And so we all have, in theory, a window of tolerance. Mm-hmm. And when we've gone through any kind of traumatic experience, it can affect us in different ways. So our tolerance levels may decrease over time as a result of the trauma. And so, and I think it's also sort of linked to, resilience, and how someone is able to kind of recover from that traumatic experience. So overall, it would be good if I could have gotten up an image, because it's nice to see the visual of it. Mm-hmm. But you have two different sides of the scale, sort of thing. Like I said, the hyperarousal, hypoarousal, and people tend to, present as quite anxious, be mm-hmm. sort of out of control, dysfunctional. So it was created in general to I think it was the National Institute for Clinical Application and Behavioral Medicine, and it's to kind of look at how it impacts, how the stresses that trauma can cause affects people's ability to function on a daily basis, what their
Yeah.
triggers might be, and the different emotions, of presenting emotions that they would have, which it kind of helps to kind of look at what part of the scale someone falls into. So I guess in therapeutic work, usually I'm able to identify, okay, this is what they're presenting with, because they fall on that side of the scale as opposed to the other, and then managing that quite sensitively and carefully based on, again, I think it links quite well to iceberg theory because
Mm-hmm.
it's again, you're seeing the surface level behaviors, and especially with young people, children and young people in schools, there's a lot of focus on, behavior, and a lot of the time it's not trauma informed because they're just looking at, well, this is the behavior
Behavior.
you're presenting with, and it's not in line with our school policies and principles, and therefore you need to be disciplined,
Punished.
punished, as opposed to actually, are you okay? And what might be going on for you, and how can we then support you and help to, push you more into, widen your window of tolerance, so to speak, and build resilience so that action and self-regulate even, so that you have healthy coping tools and strategies. Because a lot of the time when you've experienced trauma, a lot of people may have unhealthy coping strategies. So it could be, alcohol or substance misuse. It could be, again, dysfunctional relationships, which again is linked to sort of attachment and, seeking some sort of solace in. Right, it may not be, healthy for you, may not be conducive to your well-being, but that is just, there's so many different layers of trauma responses. Some people might regress in terms of maybe if they experience trauma at, say, age 7, their behaviors might be presenting as someone who's 7 years old in an adult body,
Wow.
things like that. So different, lots of different trauma responses. Yeah.
Do you think that we should be on an awareness blitz for trauma-informed practice throughout the society? Or should it just be within the remit of counselors and therapists?
Mhm. Um, I think there's a place for both, but I also recognize that a lot of systems and services now are far stretched. Even CAMS, for example, that's for children, adolescent mental health service. And the waiting times are just abysmal at the moment. They are so stretched, just not enough budget, not enough staff to be able to deal with the level of mental health issues that a lot of children and young people, adolescents are facing. And so I think it would be good in an ideal world that, most institutions, if not all, have some sort of trauma informed practice training so that they can at least hold and contain, whoever is going through any sort of traumatic experience or mental health difficulty in for a period of time until they're able to access. And even if they can't hold and contain for a reasonable amount of time, I think just being able to, manage, for example, even in the field of work, any career, some industries may be less empathic towards someone who's experienced trauma. They may not know what to do. They're thinking of things from more of a business model, and oh, this person's had a lot of time off work now and it's affecting the business, it's affecting the team, but not necessarily how can we support this member of staff so that they can integrate back into the team, back into the workforce,
And be productive.
the support that they need, accessing the support that they need. So there are EAPs, so employee assistance programs. So they do sometimes offer, counseling as part of that to staff. I'm seeing that a lot more now. However, again, usually it's often quite a short-term piece of work. But I think that is a step in the right direction for sure.
Direction. Yeah, yeah.
However, again, it's referring externally as opposed to maybe that, member of staff to line manager relationship. That line manager or the senior manager or CEO, whoever it is, may actually need more training to be more empathic, more understanding,
Mm.
more trauma informed so that they approach things with more care. And I think that is how you also retain staff over time as well, because you show that yes, the company is important, but your well-being is actually more important. And if your well-being is not taken care of, then it will affect the company. So it's kind of like a snowball effect in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if you start there with training, adequate training, I think that would be great. Yeah, a great thing and would improve, I think, society
Yeah.
overall.
Definitely. I know of, there are quite a number of schools, especially schools that work with children who have special educational needs, who have taken a trauma-informed approach to how they interact with the children, because they do realize that the children's behavior is identifying that there's something that needs to be addressed. And
Yeah.
we can't give people cake when they need bread. And so we have to ensure that we're taking care of their needs. And I've seen where children have been acting out and having meltdown, and you say to them, how can I help? Are you hungry?
Mhm.
And they're like, yes, I haven't eaten. And they get something to eat, and it's a total change. And I'm not saying that it's just hunger that has caused them to
No,
act,
but
but
that's
it's the
part of
fact
it
that
if you look at it
right,
holistically.
exactly,
Yeah.
you've taken the time to care.
Hmm.
And everybody, I think the idea of us being social beings, a lot of recovery, a lot of progress, a lot of development, a lot of peace that people get goes back to us building relationships and showing that we
Yeah.
care for
Absolutely.
people. And
Absolutely.
I, and when I think of trauma, people don't realize how simple things can be traumatic. A child
Yeah.
for
Absolutely.
the first day and be
Yeah.
separated from the parents. Sometimes the
Mm.
parents are the one in trauma because they're like, oh, my baby's leaving me, and my
Hmm.
baby's happy to be.
Separation anxiety and yeah, yeah,
know?
yeah.
And I do think we do need to pay a lot of attention to mental health, and more people are recognizing that,
Hmm.
yeah, your mental health has a profound impact on everything. Um,
Mm.
and the church
Mm.
is a key place where we always sing, let's pray. You've mentioned it before. Talk to me a little bit about what you think we should be doing, um, from your point of view as a
Hmm.
therapist.
Yeah.
Prayer, therapy, prayer
Hmm.
and therapy, prayer alone, therapy alone,
Mm.
combination. What's your take?
I think it's a combination. I don't think one goes without the other. I think ultimately, you know, we believe God is in control and God has the power to turn things around, transform lives, transform minds. And I think, and transform people. I think it's important to pray, but praying alone, I feel, isn't always sufficient, depending on the severity of the issue. So, if it's complex trauma or a complex mental health issue or illness, and it's diagnosed as well, sometimes we have to even go as far as medication. And I know some people may be against that and they may not feel it's appropriate. And it's everyone's individual decision. But I think there are people who um, may sometimes need that. They may need a stronger intervention and stronger medication to help them. I believe in taking a holistic approach wherever possible. Um, so holistic and holistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, yes, we have our health message, which is amazing, and we know, in terms of our physical well-being, there's things that we can eat and things that we can, take that are supplements and things to help us feel better overall. But mentally, I think it's definitely a lot, professional intervention is sometimes or often more needed. And that is something that's lacking. I know we also have Cornerstone Counselling Service within the church.
Okay.
But again, that, we can only go so far. That's one service, but I think it would be ideal if, there are more services, because I know there are some people who would prefer to have, a Christian
Listen.
counselor or,
Yeah.
an Adventist counselor in particular. And again, it's every man for themselves. But I think ideally, and over time, I've seen there are quite a few mental health professionals, psychologists, psychotherapists, counselors within different churches. And I think
Churches.
if there was more of a network in that way across the churches, then we could do a lot more in different areas. So whether it's Area 6D can get together and do something, Area 6A and so on. And then on a British Union conference level, then that would be even better. I know they did for the Youth Congress, they had, some good speakers for that on the mental health side of things. And I think that's definitely a step in the right
Step in the right
direction. But I
direction.
feel like generationally, I feel like, the millennials and the Gen Zs are very much more open to talking about the things that affect us, the things that we struggle with mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, socially, even. But I think there's a lot more work to be done on a wider level, with more of the mature adults in the church. And I don't think it would, I don't think it has to be a massive, I think you can start small, small steps in the right direction. And I think, yeah, having more programs around it, not just for like Mental Health Awareness Week.
This week. No, no, no.
No, that's just like Black History Month. We
Yes.
have a month to talk about all the things we've contributed, and then it doesn't matter anymore. It needs to be something that's embedded. There's systems that are in place, that people can access as and when they need to. And even if on an area level, so like I said, with my clients, I give the little crisis card. Maybe for each church can have, and some may be doing this already. So, but each church could have, their own crisis card of different services that are available within the area for different things. Because again, if we look at it holistically, and even with young people, we're looking at things that they're exposed to. It could be exploitation of any kind. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and that is it's an epidemic. It's an epidemic. So whether it's criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, grooming, gangs, county lines, all those things are issues that affect not just young people in our communities, but sometimes within our church as well. And we just don't necessarily know about it. So if we have a list of services either across London or in any particular area that they can access, I think that's one thing that we can do. And then again, having sort of like a team of people who have those, that they're in that field of expertise and specialize in these areas, who can offer support, but also from a spiritual standpoint too. And that's where we make that connection and I think bridge that gap, because we have so many professionals within the church, whether they're in the criminal justice system, whether they're in, counseling, psychotherapy, psychology, education, and I think if it's sort of like I don't know, a consortium or something, I don't know, where we could all get together and kind of think about how we can bring about positive change in our churches more, make it more trauma informed, and more empathic to the needs and more in tune with the needs of not just young people, but, adults as well, because there are different ages that can often slip through the net. There's people that may be dealing with things and they just mask it well. And I think a lot of us have become accustomed to that because happy Sabbath,
Yeah, yes.
hey, how are you? And it's like, yeah, I'm fine. But a lot of the time we're
Not.
not fine, we're not
Yeah.
okay, but we may not feel safe enough to express that. Or maybe
Yeah.
we feel that the next person isn't, aware enough, or they don't have the skills or the tools to be able to hold that space for us.
So, yeah,
And
yes.
I want to open up, and then I feel worse for opening up, you know.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so yeah, if we have key people that can create that safe space across the board, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah. And you know, we know normally talk about the church being a hospital, and
Mhm.
we we assume that people within the hospital are all trained to do things medical,
Right,
but it's not everybody, because we have ward
right,
assistants and we have the porters, and they don't
exactly.
know what the CEO knows, and the medical and the surgeon, and so
Mhm.
forth. But we can create a space where people are
Yeah,
more informed than they were when these first started. And
yeah,
it's about making people aware. So I
yeah,
can signpost you to somebody, or I can know that, okay, if
yeah.
I see somebody self-harming, or if
Mhm.
I hear somebody saying they're going to do X, Y, Z, that I know what to say to help them rather than to put them in a worse
Position.
situation.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, I agree. And I think even if we start with just doing more mental health first aid training across the churches, then that's on a
Yeah.
general level so that they're able to kind of know how to deal with, low level mental health issues, anxiety, depression, or how to even tackle suicidal ideation. Again, that's quite a taboo. We've had
Yes.
parties, sadly, that we've
Absolutely.
lost
Yes.
to
Yes.
suicide. And again, that shows the immense pressure that even so, it's
To
twofold. I think
relate.
leaders need to know how to, the ones that aren't trained, because I know there are some pastors who do, premarital counseling, but again, even that is different to trauma
Sure,
informed.
exactly. Yeah.
But if we had, a lot of leaders and departments, pastors that are trained in that way, I think that would be helpful. But also that they are able to. I know there are chaplains and things like that, but I think they face a lot of pressure too, and that's another on another scale. And so if there's something in place for them too, so they're not only learning how to support others, but also, I guess, learning how to better support themselves.
Themselves.
And
Yes.
then, like you said, we can't pour from an empty cup. So why would
No.
we
No.
expect that from our pastors?
Exactly.
Why would we
Yes.
expect that
Yes.
from our
Yes.
leaders? They should be able to have a system or a space where they're poured back into so that they
Yes.
can better shepherd the rest of us. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Oh, Lianne, thank you ever so much for sharing with us. And I'm hoping that this conversation that we're having today will act as a springboard where
Yeah.
the churches will be saying, we need to be doing something more. Yes, it's important for us to fellowship. Yes, it's important for us to have our faith. Yes, it's important for us to be aware.
Mhm.
We need to move away from saying we're not airing our dirty linen and we're going to pray everything out, because
Mhm.
God
Mhm.
has made us as intelligent beings, and He has
Yeah.
given us the
Mhm.
skill where the medicine is there, the tools
Yes.
are there. We need to
Yeah.
avail ourselves of them to ensure that we are the best version of ourselves that we can be on earth,
Right.
until He comes for us, where we
Absolutely.
are definitely our brother's keeper, and we're making sure
Absolutely.
that we
Yeah.
are being total in the help that we offer them. Um,
Absolutely. And then that is part of our duty and our calling, like you said,
exactly.
because. We will be held accountable.
Exactly.
So
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Well, we're supposed to be a servant of God and a friend to man. And
Combined.
when we think of Jesus, who is the greatest friend of all, he was a
Mm.
friend to everybody, and he met everybody's needs. And
Right.
we are to
Yeah.
be a true reflection of him. Um,
Absolutely.
Lianne, you've spoken about the fact that you've worked in schools, you've got your qualification, you've been a counselor, psychotherapist for a while now. Are you in private practice, or are you with the NHS, or do you have a combination as it relates to your work portfolio?
Yes, so and if I ever share this with friends and family, they will definitely give me the piercing eyes when it comes to private practice. But that is something that is in the works. I definitely
Yes.
aim to go into private practice because again, I really value the long-term pieces of work and like I said, trauma-informed practice and also continuity. I think it's sad. I think it's great that we have some institutions like IAPT and your local talking therapies that provide support for the community. But again, it is very time limited. It is quite brief, and sometimes the waiting times are, by the time you get access to the support, things have probably reached crisis point, even more so.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think, having private practice will definitely help to bridge that gap even more. But I'm especially passionate about, the Black community
Yeah.
and any disadvantaged and communities. But also, yeah, I guess we are technically the global
Yeah. Global
majority,
majority. Yeah.
but we are minoritized here. And
Hmm.
so I think I definitely want to um, support the community that I'm in because it's quite diverse, like I said, and to be able to give back. I've worked in very diverse areas, South London, West
Hmm.
London, Hounslow, Brent, all very diverse areas. And I think, yeah, that is something that is in the pipeline. So I pray very soon, when the time is right, I will go into private practice and hopefully that will be successful.
So yeah, and we wish you very well. We hope
Thank
that when you do decide to make that move, that success will be your wings.
you,
Thank
man.
you
Thank you.
very much,
Thanks so
Lianne. It
much for
has been
having
a
me.
pleasure
Thank
talking
you.
with
My
you,
pleasure
and
too.
I'm looking forward to more conversations with you.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you have been blessed by the information we have shared with you today, and I am hoping that you picked up on some of the organizations that Lianne mentioned. I'm just going to ask her to mention the networking and
Mhm.
some of the organizations that people can tap into if they need support. If you could just repeat
Yeah.
that.
So, on a general level or in your particular area, I would say you can go through your GP to access your local IAPT talking therapy service, and that is free. And outside of that, you have Samaritans, which operates 24/7,
Yes.
7 days a week. And that is a helpline that you can call anonymously. And they have trained, listeners to listen to whatever you need to bring. Got Papyrus have a helpline as well. So that's Papyrus. And they specialize with young people. So they have a lot of resources online as well that can help you, especially if you're a parent maybe and you see your child or your young person might be struggling, or maybe you're a youth leader and you see some of your young people might be struggling. That's a good support service to use as well. There are, if you want to look into any private counselors and psychotherapists, you can search via the BACP for
Mhm.
registered members and some accredited therapists as well. And then
And
Batten,
BA,
BACP, yeah.
and what's that? British.
And so that is the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy.
Okay.
And so you have a register on there. So all the registered counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists, coaches are on there. And you can have a look through the registry to see if there's anyone that you think might stand out for you that
Good for
you
you.
you've got counselling directory as well.
Okay.
And Batten, which I mentioned earlier, which is the Black African Asian Therapy Network. Again, they have a register as well, so you can search for a professional on there too. And I think lastly, there's also the Association for Christian Counselors. So again, another register that you can check
Yeah.
and see. Yeah, and I think those are the main ones I can think of. I've probably forgotten some, but again,
You've
just
given us
search
a
for
lot to
them.
go. You've given us a lot to take in, and we are very appreciative. Thank you ever so much for spending the time with
Thank
us
you.
today. Ladies
Thank you
and
for having
gentlemen,
me.
we've come to the end of another It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanya. And to my community, I want you to remember, be a dreamer, be a
Mm.
doer, a thinker, see possibility everywhere. And just before I end, there's a question that I normally ask, and because I've been chatting with you so much,
Yeah.
I want to back up. My program is called It Is Possible Tuesdays. Okay.
Mhm.
Or yeah. What is it in your life that you would say has riveted home the thought that it is possible?
Mm. Mm. Wow. Good question. What is it in my life? I think I think my own journey. I lost my dad 5 years ago, and that was a very pivotal moment. And I was also I started my counseling training just before he was diagnosed. And then I continued after he passed away, maybe 5 or 6 months after. And everyone would look at me and think, what are you doing here?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think he always encouraged me to, go after my dreams and that I can do anything if I put my mind to it. His, nickname for me was champion. And I think I've always tried to keep that at the core of what I do and know that if I can get through grief, multiple losses and training, which is very intense, very, faith struggles and trying to juggle life and work, then I think it shows me that anything is possible as long as I keep God at the center of what I do and I hold on to him, even if it's at the hem of his garment, then yeah, it's
Definitely.
possible.
Oh, thank you, Lianne. I am so happy that I remembered to ask you that question because, um, yes, definitely it is possible with God,
It
even
is
holding on to the hem
possible.
of his garment.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank
you
you.
for
Thank you for
sharing
having
that
me.
with us. Ah,
Thank you.
yes.
God bless.
So remember, be a dreamer, a doer, a thinker, and see possibility everywhere. Because you are alive, everything is possible. But Jesus
Amen.
beheld them and said unto them, with men, this is impossible, but with God, all
All
things
things
are
are possible.
possible. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you very much and see you next time for another It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanya podcast. Bye, ladies. Bye, gentlemen. See you.
When I call on Jesus, all things are possible. I can mount on wings like eagles and soar. When I call on Jesus, mountains are gonna fall. 'Cause he'll move heaven and earth to come rescue me when I call.